So welcome everyone. Welcome to this edition of our series Linnean Lens. My name is Isabelle Charmentier. I'm the head of collections here at the Linnean Society. And in the background, although he's hidden, is also Will Beharrell, our librarian. For those of you who are new to the format of Linnean Lens, this is something that was born out of COVID years, but we've kept on going with because of the popularity of these events. We focus on one item from our collections using an external camera. And today we are going to focus on the Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus's Lapland diary. The diary is actually on display at the moment. It's part of our series of events related to our current exhibition on display, Naturalist Notebooks. And the exhibition is on until the 20th of September, I believe, just after open house. So there's loads of time for anyone coming into London to come and have a look at it. We're opened Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you don't need an appointment and the exhibition is free. So do feel free to come in if you have been inspired by our speaker today, who is Professor Staffan Müller-Wiel, who's Professor of History and Philosophy of the Life Sciences at the University of Cambridge, part of the History and Philosophy of Science department. Staffan has been working on Linnaeus since his PhD in the 1990s, and he is a fellow of the Society, and we worked together on the project Rewriting the System of Nature, Linnaeus's use of writing technologies, quite a while back now, when we were both at the University of Exeter. So since then, Staffan has kept on writing about writing and researching about various aspects of Linnaeus's work, and he has taken more of a close-up interest in the Linnaeus Lapland diary. So it made him the ideal speaker to talk to you about Linnaeus's Lapland diary today. And I think that's it from me. So over to you, Staffan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isabel. I share my screen. Should be all right. Yes, looks like it. Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction and opportunity to speak here in this series. So I'm going to talk about Linnaeus's Lapland Journey diary. From 1732. We will take a closer look at the diary later on, but I first wanted to provide a little bit of context for this. So as happens a lot with historical figures, most of you, if you've heard of Linnaeus, will have a certain image of him in your mind. We mostly know him as this 18th century professor from Uppsala with a wig, a little bit elderly, and as a systematizer of nature. He's famous for his Systema Naturae, published in the Netherlands in 1735, slightly obsessed with classification, including classifying humans, of course, and the creation of rational order. But there is another side to him. Linnaeus was also a dedicated naturalist in the field, and he was also an explorer. In the summer of 1732, while he was still a relatively young medical student, 25 years old at Uppsala, he received funding from the Royal Society of Science in Uppsala, the Kunglig Vetenskapssocieteten, not to be mixed up with the Stockholm Academy of Sciences that Linnaeus later co-founded in 1739, and a number of influential mentors to undertake a journey to Lapland and basically describe the landscapes, its inhabitants, plants, animals, and minerals from up there. He produced a manuscript diary from this, and also later on in the Netherlands published a work on Lapland, the Flora lapponica, a catalogue of plants growing in Lapland that I will come back to at the very end. Now this created his fame as much as the Systema Naturae. There's a famous oil portrait that I'm showing here that shows him in a Lapland dress. He referred to himself when he presented himself to audiences in the Netherlands as a son of Boreas, as a son of the North Wind. So his fame very much relied on this journey as well. Now, like the Systema Naturae, there exist numerous translations and editions of his Lapland diary, the journey diary that he produced from this, but they all appeared posthumously. He didn't publish this diary during his lifetime, and that's going to be sort of a leading question that will occupy us here, why he didn't do so, and perhaps also what he did instead with this journal. So there was, it appeared first, the Lapland journey diary, in English, in an English translation that was commissioned by James Edward Smith in 1811, so long after Linnaeus dies in 1778. And then towards the end of the 19th century, you get the first Swedish editions that are really based on the original manuscript that transcribe the original Swedish and Latin text of the diary. And the latest of these editions is from 2003, a beautiful and actually surprisingly cheap a folio edition in 3 volumes. And there were numerous translations into German, French, Dutch, and Finnish. And I think there's even a Hungarian one. And this is because the diary is not only a classic in the history of science, it's sort of in a way the first modern travel account in the history of science, where a lot is of practices that we know from anthropology, ethnography, ecology are really quite present. But it's also a classic in the Swedish in the canon of Swedish national literature. And one of the translations, the translation into German was actually produced by an Austrian poet, H.C. Artmann, who was fascinated by its style. Now, this points to very different reasons for the popularity of Linnaeus already in the 18th century, but especially later when these editions and translations come out. Rather than what Linnaeus produced here was not a general abstract guide to biodiversity like his Systema Naturae, but really a lively travel account that reveled in the local and particular. And the Swedish historian of science, Sten Lindroth, has therefore spoken of the 2 faces of Linnaeus, the slightly scholastic, dusty classifier of nature, and the empiricist, who is really a great describer of nature. Linnaeus himself produced a sketch of the narrative that held his travel diary together. That's what you see on this slide here, 2 sketches actually. And from these sketches, which one of which really looks like the storyboard for a film, it emerges that his diary is actually a tale full of adventures that really has literary qualities. In a letter to Uppsala professor Lars Ruberg, that is dated 14th of August 1732, so comes from his journey when he allegedly was in Svappavaari, north of Kalix, summarizes some of the highlights that are also depicted on the lower right image by Linnaeus. And I quote, "I have seen the midnight sun in the strongest winter. I was freezing in the strongest winter so that fingers and face were about to fall off, even if summer could be seen, and in other places it was so hot that one could bake turnips on stones. I fell down from mountains more than 1,300 meters and still got away alive," which is indeed quite astonishing. I have been in holes where water was below the snow and had to be dragged up by ropes. I had to take aim at a lap on the Norway side, which rarely goes wrong. We see here how Linnaeus portrays himself as covering uncharted territory during his journey, entering an empty, unknown space, a terra nullius, a land that belongs to no one, and enduring dangers and discomfort to bring back knowledge. Yet he also relied on existing infrastructures and help from the indigenous inhabitants of Lapland, this reindeer herding Sápmi. The episode of aiming at a lap refers to difficulties he had, indeed, in eliciting that help from Sápmi, the reindeer from the Sápmi. So the reliance on infrastructure shows up in a map that he produced of his route through the north of Scandinavia and especially through Lapland. He mainly traveled along the coast, along highways and staying at inns. That forms sort of the backbone of his journey. And then occasionally undertook excursions inland along rivers and to the outposts of the Swedish states, which were rectories in villages far inland. His reliance on hospitality especially comes to the fore in a list of people who hosted him during his journey. That's the document in the middle next to the map. And these were people who were living especially in vicarages, often quite far away from the coast, especially priests. And he gives little mini reviews of these hosts. So, for example, one of these reads, "Pastor Ole Gran in Lycksele, a quiet, handsome man, suffered inconvenience from me both on the journey up and down the river, the Ume River, promoted my journey with great care, delighted me well, and gave me a lap boat in miniature, which cost 2 carolines." But he was also relying on hospitality from the Sápmi. So the document on the very right of this slide shows a passport that asks the Sápmi to support his travel by providing guides and translators. So again, I read it out to you. Order to all policemen and their deputies in Lycksele Lappmark to support Linnaeus. All policemen and their deputies within Lycksele Lappmark herewith receive the order to help Mr. Carl Linnaeus, if he so demands, with all obligingness in whatever he might need or ask from them, and especially that they either act as his guides themselves wherever he goes, or otherwise use other obliging laps for that who can talk Swedish. And it shall be indicated to the other laps to let him pass through their land and woods freely and without obstruction, which you should set yourself as obedient precept. So this is 18th century bureaucratic language, but basically it shows that he couldn't just travel freely. He had to travel with guides and translators, and also some assurance that he wouldn't be harmed. So let's turn from the journey to the manuscript that was produced from it, and that we're going to show in a few minutes. It is preserved in the collections and one at the Linnean Society, and it is, without understatement, probably one of its most valuable treasures. It's bound in a patterned cardboard that Linnaeus used in the 1740s for other manuscripts as well. He carried out various travels to the provinces of various provinces of Sweden, Öland, the island on the east coast, Skåne in the south, and they have similar cardboard wrappers. So it was bound after the journey, so we can assume that it originally was composed of loose sheets. And this is also proven by an original cover that is made from vellum that has been preserved in the collections, which is more like a folder than really the cover of a bound book. We will see it in detail in a few minutes. So importantly, the diary as we have it is not the diary that Linnaeus carried around in Lapland. In fact, a lot indicates that the bulk of the Lapland diary was composed in hindsight from notes taken during the journey. We have, by a curious accident, also one of the notebooks that Linnaeus used during the journey. And the diary, that's on the left of this slide, and the diary, in contrast to this notebook, is a strikingly clean manuscript with many drawings and very neatly laid out, very few deletions or corrections. So it really makes quite an orderly impression. According to the Linnaeus scholar Gunnar Broberg, Linnaeus probably compiled his diary from notes that he took while traveling, during a break he took from traveling in August when staying in Kalix, a town in Ostrobothnia, and we will see evidence for that. And it thus looks like Linnaeus was planning really to publish this. He gives it the shape of a book manuscript to be published, but he eventually, as I already mentioned, never did. One reason is that publishing it might have revealed that his reports to the Society of Sciences that funded the journey greatly overestimated the distances he had actually traveled. And yeah, there might be that story behind this. But what was the use of the manuscript then? Did Linnaeus just forget about his journey and kept the diary as a memory only? Really, to see the use that he made of this, we want to take a closer look at the original manuscript of the diary and also some related manuscripts, most importantly, an index he produced of the travel diary. That's when we have to switch to another technology. Okay, so what we have here is the original cover of Linnaeus's Lapland journey. We are pretty sure it is the original cover because Linnaeus used it to keep some loose papers, among them the list of hosts that I was talking about in it. And one can see that it's not really a book cover. It's more like a folder in which he kept the diary in the form of loose sheets. It's quite dirty. It's been in the field. Maybe one day we can carry out DNA analysis and find traces of Laplandic organisms or whatever to prove that point. And this is the diary itself. It has a modern binding, but within that modern binding, we find Linnaeus's original binding, as I explained, produced later with the title of this journey, Iter Lapponicum. Iter is Latin for journey, and Lapponicum is the adjective. So the title is actually Laplandic journey, and the year in which he undertook that. On the first flyleaf, we have an owner's mark. So this is James Edward Smith recording that this belongs to the collection that he had bought from Linnaeus's widow, Linnaeus's manuscript and specimen collections, but also his library. It says president of the Linnean Society, which he was by buying this collection. And at that time, when he's making this owner mark, he's still in Norwich, not in London. And then you see the title page of the diary. And as is the case with many manuscripts of Linnaeus, its layout suggests really the title page of a book, with the author first, the title, then a little bit about the contents, with a motto, O ens entium miserere mei, which is Latin and means O being of being, take pity on me, or have mercy on me, and then various little notes also. That's the title page. Now, what follows is not actually the diary itself in the first place, but a list of all the places Linnaeus, a long table of all the places Linnaeus has visited and his expenses. So he notes down what he pays in the inns he stays over, things he buys, food he needs to requisition, etc. So this is his accounts, so to speak, and it goes on for quite a while, until we come to a page which I will come back to later on, entitled Querenda, which is a list of questions that Linnaeus was asked to investigate by the members of the Society of Sciences in Uppsala, a long list of questions, and then only the travel diary itself. Now, being a travel diary, there is one fundamental way in which this text is structured that is not always easy to see, but Linnaeus gives a day-by-day account and provides the dates for this, and I will try to show the date here. Can you? Yes, exactly, 12th of May. That is old dates, Swedish old dates. They hadn't adopted the Gregorian calendar yet. They were still stuck with their own Swedish calendar, and it's in a modern counting the 23rd of May, I think, and that also happens to be Linnaeus's birthday. He went, his first day on this travel was also his birthday. So that's structured on a very basic level, the travel diary, the dates, the days, day by day, and of course the places he visits. In this case, as you can maybe see, Uppsala, as it says in the first line of this paragraph here. Now, I want to turn to a part of the Lapland journey. So he moves northwards along the coast, but then in Umeå, he turns inland along the river Ume to enter Sápmi territory, Lycksele, Lapland, Lapponia, Lycksele. So he has these headings in the journal that roughly divide up the journal into regions that he visits. And you see a very famous little drawing that he makes of the Sápmi that accompanies him there, who over long stretches of the way they have to go, has to carry the boat on his back. So Linnaeus is very impressed by that. And then there are several pages of very detailed descriptions of Sápmi life and material culture that Linnaeus compiles, their architecture, word lists, really detailed drawings of clothing, and here a knife, that he compiles while staying with Ole Gran, his hosts who treated him so nicely and gave him a lap boat in miniature, probably just a boat like this. And you see here a long list of Sápmi words with their translations, mostly words for plants and animals. And it so happened that in Lycksele, that he visits here, there was not only a priest, but also a schoolmaster, Per Fjellström, who was working on what became the first dictionary of the Sámi language and the first grammar of Sámi language. So the point here is that Linnaeus collects knowledge that is already sort of secondhand. It's knowledge of priests and officials that occupy the outposts of the Swedish state in Lapland. Okay, let's turn to the next page that we wanted. So another excursion inland takes Linnaeus to a region that is known as Padjelanta, the highlands, northwest of the city of Luleå. He follows again the river, the Lule River. The geography is all conveniently named in Lapland, and enters the mountains. Here you have a first view of the mountains, and they really look a little bit like that due to glacial processes, glaciation. The mountains are all quite rounded. It looks naive, but it captures the landscape quite well. And you see a little drawing here of the midnight sun that Linnaeus is very impressed by, and you see a little figure waving at the sun, the midnight sun, and that's possibly Linnaeus's only self-portrait. So he enters the mountains from here. This is the chapter Fjällen, which is just the Swedish word for fells or mountains, highlands. And this is a famous passage from the journal because he says that when he comes up into the mountains, he doesn't know where he is really. He doesn't know whether he's in Asia or Africa because all the plants he sees are unknown to him. And what does a proper botanist do if he doesn't know plants? He sits down and produces plant descriptions, and there is a numbered list of these plants that he encounters there, up to 30 here, and later on, I think, he carries on the numbering. He finds more and more, something like 50 unknown species, which are all described in a few words with little sketches, etc. Oops, yeah, thank you. Now, Linnaeus stayed not very long with the Sámi in the mountains, who have their summer camps up there and large herds of reindeer. He stays for short of a week and then travels on westwards to reach the Norwegian coast. So this one we still need. And this is when he comes to Norway. There's a wonderful drawing of jellyfish. So he visits the Atlantic, and it also shows that Linnaeus, when he had to and wanted to, could draw. There are fish that he draws. There are also some quite charming plant drawings. Some people are so convinced that Linnaeus couldn't draw that they say this must have been done by someone else without any evidence. Here are some more drawings from his stay in the highlands and on the Norwegian coast, including the drawing of a reindeer with its packaging on the back, etc. This part of the diary is actually quite different from the one I described before, where Linnaeus stays with priests and schoolmasters and learns a lot from them. This part of the diary is a much more first-person account of experiences he makes, interactions he has both with the Sámi and their animals, and that's a point I will come back to. There's another long section of the journey that follows his stay in the mountains. He's back in Kvikkjokk, one of these outposts of the Swedish state, now staying with another priest and his wife, Kristina Groth, is historically well known. She spoke Sámi. She had herself reindeer. She made her own furniture. We still have that furniture in Kvikkjokk. And this is something like 10 pages of information on the Sámi and their culture that he gets from Christina Groth. So again, he draws items like this ski and a ski pole, and a long description of weddings, how they make wire from 10, how the Sámi make wire from 10, apparently something that is done by the women, and so on. So again, second-hand knowledge, but second-hand knowledge from people who have systematically collected knowledge about the Sámi. There, that's the one. Okay, so the journey comes to an end. I mentioned in my presentation that there were periods later on when he was on the what today is the Finnish coast of the Baltic, and here Linnaeus encountered difficulties because he didn't speak Finnish, and the Finns quite obviously didn't want to talk Swedish with him. And so there were a lot of tensions between the Finnish and the Swedish state at that point in time, following the Great Nordic War. And there are actually quite long stretches of the diary in which Linnaeus near to writes nothing. There's hardly anything. So here is an example. These are the entries for the 14th to 17th of August, and then there's a break, and there's later on in mid-September a 2-week break in the diary where he almost writes nothing, and around that there is a lot of bad things he has to say about the rural Finnish population. They are the children of darkness, as he calls them, and they do not get a good press with Linnaeus, in stark contrast to the Sámi, who he admires in many ways. And he eventually returns along the Finnish Baltic coast to Uppsala, crosses the Baltic, of course, via the island of Öland, and then again you have this entium, being of all beings, at the end, and the diary comes to an end. Now you see that there are more pages, and this is actually what you find in the back of this journal, is the official report Linnaeus sent to the Society of Sciences, the Vetenskapssocieteten in Uppsala, and which is quite well known because Linnaeus hugely overestimates the miles he has traveled, also because he was sort of paid his expenses on a per mile ratio, yeah, as I said, that might be a reason why he didn't quite want to publish this. What is interesting also is that this report, together with the tables in the beginning, sort of bookend his diary. So it's sort of also the official document for him that justifies and legitimizes his travel and his expenses to the outside world. Now, but that is not all. This is not all that Linnaeus did with this journal. And to figure out how he actually used it for the rest of his life, one has to turn to another manuscript that we want to take a close look now. It's one of the most important documents in the context of his Lapland journey. But it has long been overlooked. It's not part of any of the scholarly editions that exist. Nobody has really talked about it. And it is an index that Linnaeus produced for his diary. It's a very detailed index. It is noted down on scrap paper, so paper of various sizes with other unrelated notes on it. Here, for example, an unrelated note. And then just like an index, it has a long list of keywords structured thematically. So this is about vestes, the clothes the Sámi wear, about their house, domus. And here is a whole page on reindeer. So this is all information about reindeer. Linnaeus refers to the diary with these numbers that you see here. Um, up there for an example, an entry 48, 49. These numbers do not refer to the pages of his journal, but to numbers he notes in the margin. He originally had the plan, apparently, to divide up, to give every single paragraph in his diary a number, but then, as so often, is a little bit too lazy for that, and then just breaks every page down into half. But he can make very fine-grained references to his journal, and that's what he does in this index. One entry I want to point out is about the diseases of reindeer. Morbi, can you find Morbi? Yes, there, exactly. No, it's here, there. Yeah, Morbi. That's the diseases of reindeer. The first disease is very unfortunate castration that they suffer from humans. And then there is a disease called Kurpma. That's a Sámi word for a parasitic fly that lays its eggs on the back of reindeer, and the larvae develop under the skin of reindeer. And you see two numbers, 141 and 148 next to it. That's, yeah. Can you find it? 100, there. 141 and 148. Yeah. The Kurpma also appears in another page of the index, which is a very nice example of scrap paper, of second-hand use of paper. Paper was very expensive at the time. And here again, this is the mainly about the plants and animals you find in Lapland, an index. And here you have a section on the insects. And if you go down, you find Kurpma here, again with the number 148. And if we return to the Lapland diary, is it that? Ah, yeah, this is right. You see, it's been cut by when it was bound, the book, but here you see the number 148. And what it says here in the Swedish original is how Linnaeus took out some of the maggots of this fly from the backs of reindeer, and how he also sees the fly nearby and thinks there might be a connection between the fly and these larvae, but he isn't quite sure yet. So that is when he's in the highlands with the Sámi and their big herds of reindeer. Okay. Yeah, I want to return, I think. So the index is, as you can see, extremely detailed. And it was really an efficient tool to readily extract information from the diary on any given subject. That's what this index did for Linnaeus. We know from some of the stray notes that are unrelated on the scrap paper that Linnaeus used that this index must have been written after 1734. So probably when he was in Holland and when he was preparing some form of publication about Lapland. And that's what I'm going to turn to now, but I'm doing that again with the PowerPoint presentation. That should have worked. Okay, I mentioned the list of querenda, or to be asked, points to be investigated, that introduces the Lapland diary. And parasitic insects were actually the subject of one of the very first questions in the querenda, question 5 on this slide. That question is about Rangiferum Historia, the history or an account of the reindeer. The members of the Royal Society of Sciences want to know all there is to know about reindeer, but also their ulcers in the skin. So they draw particular attention to what is called the warbles, the swellings that the maggots of this parasitic fly cause. The fly is also called simply the reindeer warble fly because of that. And Linnaeus follows this quite religiously, this list of questions. He addresses most of these questions in his diary. And here are the 4 sections from the diary that refer to the reindeer warble fly. So what you see immediately is that these come from different dates, from different points in the journey. And that's, of course, the difficulty you have with a journey diary. The observations you make may be about the same subject, but you may have made them on very different days during very different parts of your journey. And that's also the case for the reindeer warble fly. So I just quickly go through these 4 passages in the travel diary. On July 5, he has an entry where he rejects as absurd the idea that the stains in the skin of reindeer, the warbles, were due to smallpox or some kind of contagious disease. And he mentions for the first time the Sápmi word for the reindeer warbles, kurpma. And this is information that he gets from Christina Groth in Kvikkjokk, whom I already mentioned, the woman who was very knowledgeable about reindeer but also was fluent in Sápmi. On July 7, that is the one entry that we took a very close look at. He actually interacts with the reindeer, says that he presses out some of the maggots from the backs of the reindeer, which he couldn't have done without the assistance of the Sápmi, of course, who after all owned these animals, and also suspects a connection with the fly. On July 19th, he observes the reaction of reindeer to the fly. So if the fly is around, the reindeer carry out some kind of ballet of movements. They try to avoid the fly. Must be quite a sight. And he allegedly also catches a fly, which flew with its vulva exerted and having a little seed in its small opening. So he makes the connection. He observes how the fly lays its eyes. And he concludes this with, "I saw herself in natura." And as I said earlier, it is the cause of the reindeer swellings. So now he's convinced this is the case. And on July 21, this is followed by observations on the incidence of reindeer warbles in different age classes of reindeer across the year. So about their life cycle, but also about the exact anatomical location of the reindeer warbles that is apparent from slaughtering reindeer. This is again information he gets from Christina Groth. He doesn't slaughter an animal himself. He isn't there all the year to say something about the incidence of this disease. So he's sort of back in civilization and can rely on secondhand knowledge. Now, after his return from the journey, Linnaeus produces a whole range of manuscripts, many of which contain surprisingly elaborate discussions of the warble fly and how Linnaeus went about to investigate the warble fly, among other things, by carrying a pupa in a small box in his trouser, pocket to see whether the fly actually develops from it, and it does. So he makes a little experiment. Now, these manuscripts, there are many of them on very different subjects. We can easily see how the index would have helped him to put these manuscripts together. So one is a manuscript only about reindeer diseases. Another is a manuscript here on the right-hand side, only about the insects of Lapland. And for each of these, he can sort of readily draw on his index and his Lapland diary to put together various information. And some of this then eventually gets published also. The Flora lapponica, on the face of it, is a catalog of Laplandic plants, but Linnaeus uses every opportunity to talk about other aspects of Laplandic nature and culture. He uses the plants, so to speak, as excuses to speak about other subjects. So this slide shows 2 pages on which he speaks about the reindeer warblefly, and he connects this to a botanical subject by inserting this chapter on the reindeer warblefly into the chapter on mushrooms in Flora lapponica, because the Sápmi burn mushrooms to drive the fly away from their animals. So it's quite a complicated chain of associations. But again, you can see that once he has the idea to write a little bit about the fly in the context of mushrooms, he can turn to his index and easily extract the information on that. Finally, Linnaeus also publishes a whole essay on the reindeer warblefly. It's a veritable life history of the fly. It describes its entire life cycle, its interaction with reindeer, what the Sápmi do to help the reindeer evade the animal, i.e. burn mushrooms, etc. pp. It's, again, really a literary piece. It's a wonderfully written essay. Unfortunately, it only exists in Swedish, but it contains amazing observations of interactions and between reindeer warbleflies, reindeer and reindeer herders, but also about the ecology of these relationships. So I want to end on a little bit of a reflection on these observations that I've made. What we were able to see with the example of the reindeer warblefly, or korpma as it is called in Sápmi, is that Linnaeus's experience in Lapland had a profound influence on his outlook on nature. Not so much for his taxonomic thinking, but decidedly for what we would call his ecological thinking, and what he himself called the economy of nature. The example of warbleflies and the intimate relations between them, reindeer herders, and other elements of the natural environment like dogs or mushrooms, as I pointed out, continue to crop up in Linnaeus's writings on the economy of nature in his later life, and they thus show that his Lapland journey really also profoundly influenced his thinking about nature beyond just the system of nature. So that's where I want to end on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan, not only for showing us the background to the diary, but also the diary itself, and then the way the diary was used for further research and writings by Linnaeus down the line. I think I've learned a lot, so that's great. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A, and more might come. We've got about 8 minutes for questions. Someone asks, can you remind people who sponsored Linnaeus's expedition? I know you've said it at the beginning.
Yes,
but...
yeah. That was the Royal Society of Sciences in Uppsala, as I said, that was the Academy of Sciences in Sweden back then in 1732. The much more famous Academy of Sciences in Stockholm was founded by Linnaeus and other people in 1739 only. And it was a society that was, or academy, more properly called, that was founded in the very late 17th century. It sponsored a journey to Lapland by one of Linnaeus's mentors and professors, Olaus Rudbeck the Younger, in 1695. And it was mainly a society that tried to sell to the rest of Europe the idea that Sweden is a wonderful place to make scientific observations and experiments. Because it is very cold in the north, because you have the midnight sun, you have the midnight, the dark time during winter. It offers unique aspects of nature to investigate. And so financing his journey was very much along this program. And of course, that society was committed to useful knowledge, producing useful knowledge for the exploration and eventually exploitation of nature and the colonization of the North by the Swedish state.
Thank you. As usual, quite a lot of questions have come in. So I'll start with this one. O Entium is an unusual opening to a prayer. Does it reflect distinctive, perhaps deist beliefs quite a long way from mainstream Lutheran Christianity?
Yes, that's a very good observation. So Linnaeus is often described as very religious, and his outlook on nature is also often described as being inspired by a theological agenda, which in many ways is right, but it sort of overlooks the fact that Linnaeus, as in almost all things, was very idiosyncratic in his religious beliefs. And so for one very striking example is that he did not believe that the flood and the story of Noah ever happened. He doesn't believe in the flood. He believes that God created the world in the beginning, but afterwards it develops according to the laws that he put down once and for all. And God afterwards never intervenes in nature. He has instituted everything wisely so that every plant and animal can reproduce and reproduce in balance with other plants and animals. But God therefore doesn't need to interfere with nature anymore. So in many ways, he's not a good Lutheran, and he gets in trouble with the theological faculty at his university.
Thank you. I think we might go slightly over time just to warn people because there's quite a lot of really interesting questions. Just as a note, there's a librarian just says, I really love the insight into Linnaeus's indexing. Very much like that. So James Edwards translated the diary in 1811. Marianne Constantine asked, is there a good modern translation as well?
Yeah, it wasn't James Edward Smith who personally translated it. He asked a young Swedish gentleman who stayed in London to do this for him, but he wasn't very happy with it and heavily redacted the translation. So and it's very much turning Linnaeus's diary into a diary that looks more like the diary of a traveling pastor of about 60 years than a 25-year-old medical student. And there is a modern translation by Peter Graves, published in 1995, which is very good. But in many ways just modernizes the English of James Edward Smith's translation. So he also leaves out a lot of bits from the from the journal, basically based on what James Edward Smith left out. So, for example, the long list of plants that Linnaeus describes when he comes for the first time into the mountains is omitted from all English translations. But Peter Graves' translation is a very nice one and the best one we have. But unfortunately, I think out of print and very difficult to get.
Yeah, that's true. Another question to ask, what broader themes does his journal reveal about the relationship between Sweden and the Sápmi people?
Oh, yeah, one could say a lot about that. There are quite a lot of instances in which Linnaeus reports conversations with the Sápmi. Some of these are just about information he tries to gather. Some of these are about their way of life and Linnaeus trying to understand their way of life. So he asks them, for example, why they don't build houses and villages. And they say, well, we move around. That's why. Fairly obvious question and answer. But there are also instances where he takes on and records complaints by the Sápmi about their treatment by the Swedish settlers. So Swedish settlements are expanding into the north and along the rivers into the Sápmi territories. And there are a lot of conflicts, mainly about fishing. Fishing rights. The Sápmi have fishing rights. They own the lakes with fish, but the settlers, with violence, take over those rights, and they also begin to occupy more and more land that the Sápmi use for reindeer grazing. So there are conflicts that Linnaeus reports on, and they are quite interesting to look at. Also, that the Sápmi have to visit the church, otherwise they have to pay a penalty, and they complain about that it's difficult to get to church, etc. So it's an interesting subject.
And just to link into another question, which is mostly about the languages used by Linnaeus's writing. The diary is actually both in Swedish and in Latin. And the question is, how much of Linnaeus's writings are just in Swedish, and is that maybe they're not as widely known because of that? But certainly the diary is in both Swedish and Latin.
Yes. So the majority of the diary is written in Swedish. Linnaeus uses Latin whenever he sort of enters technical territory. So when he describes plants and animals, then he uses Latin. When he describes the morphology in detail, he also often switches into Latin when he talks about medical issues. And sometimes one can see that these medical issues are sort of maybe not proper for vernacular Swedish. So, for example, when he writes about menstruation among the Sápmi and the Swedish in the north, menstruation patterns, again, information he can only have gotten from a woman, probably Christina Groth. Generally, for his writings, there is a lot he published in Swedish, a lot of animal descriptions, a lot of writings about useful plants, about so-called economic topics, what he calls economic topics, so how to make use of natural resources. And most of that isn't translated, and therefore there's a whole side of Linnaeus that is lesser known. Also because even his writings in Latin that are very descriptive, and so, for example, an essay on a particular plant species have never been translated. So there is this side to Linnaeus that is better known in Sweden than anywhere else. Yes.
And what about personal reflections? You've talked about the more the ethnographic section, the scientific descriptions. Are there also personal reflections? Someone asks.
Yeah, there are there are two kinds of reflections. So one is that he very often highlights that he's in danger, and why did I set out on this journey? It's so dangerous that almost a rock almost fell on my head, and this would have been the end of this theater play, as he likes to put it. So that's one kind of reflection. So a little bit of self-pity mixed with look how great a guy I am. I don't know how reflective that actually is. The other kind of reflection is in the form of making recourse to ancient mythology. So he describes himself as a Perseus who rescues Andromeda, which is a plant that he finds growing there, and he has these. He meets a famous passage from the journey. He meets a woman, a Sápmi woman, who can help him out, him and his guides out when they are stuck in the swamps of Lapland, when there are spring tides, and he describes her as a furia. So he deals with situations where he feels himself out of depth by taking recourse to a classical mythology and poetry. He cites Ovid a lot. Ovid in exile, the poetry Ovid writes when he's in exile, when he's not in Rome, but far away. But it's always sort of between the lines, if I can say so. It's not a very sort of, he doesn't put self-reflection very much forward. Yeah.
I'm going to take a last question. Apologies to everyone else who has sent in questions, and I'm not going to have time to tackle these. But I thought this one was quite interesting to end with. When you said that the journey influenced or changed his thinking about nature, I was interested to understand a little more in what ways.
Yeah, so before the journey, we have a lot of manuscripts of Linnaeus already. He was, from his very first days as a student, a very ambitious student. So he puts together all these manuscripts for future publications that looked like little neat books with title page and frontispiece and everything, a list of contents and page numbers and headers and footers and etc. But these are all about what we would nowadays call taxonomy. And another set of manuscripts is about medicine. This whole complex of thinking about ecology and ecological relationships that Linnaeus is also very important for, this whole complex of ideas only comes in after his return from the journey. And one fundamental principle of his ecological thinking is a balance principle, that the rates at which organisms reproduce, different species of organisms, that these rates must be adapted to each other so that they don't outgrow their own resources or devastate other resources in nature. And that's a principle that one also finds in Sápmi thinking. If one looks at ethnobiological literature about and by the Sápmi themselves, these are principles they also know of. They think in terms of natural balances. And so that's an aspect of Linnaeus that is really shaped, I think, by his experiences in Lapland, where he is directly confronted with an economy, with reindeer economy that very much relies on ecological relationships.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. I'm aware we're 6 minutes over, so I'm going to stop it there. But thank you so
Thank you.
much for such an interesting talk and uncovering the mysteries of the Lapland journey as diary. As I said, it's on display at the moment in our Naturalist Notebooks exhibition, so you're very welcome to come in and look at it. It also, I believe, features in our L50 50 objects, stories and discovering from the Linnean Society, which I think, Stefan, you wrote.
Me and
that
Elena
Elena,
Isaev.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. So
yeah.
there's a section in here, and this is available online to buy. Will has just put the link in. Just to say, the next Linnean Lens will be on Science and Satire, the remarkable cartoons of Richard Owen, which is a notebook we also have in our collections. Very striking and unusual notebook with drawings by Richard Owen. That will be with Leo Demetriou on the Tuesday, the 8th of July. So we look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Stefan, once again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.